to kick off the questions, Cliff, and I think this is one of fairness. You know, at some point you go, man, the challenge is too hard. You know, we spent as an organization, let's say $100 million credit union. You're making $4 million a year. You've got, you know, call it a $500,000 annual budget on IT. You know, how much more do we have to spend before, you know, we go and can ascertain that we're in a better position than some other targets? So, you know, if there's an owner of a business, how do you sit down with them and talk about, you know, where do you get to from here?
What I have found is that most people start with the opinion, look, to be secure, I got to spend a lot of money, and I don't have it. So kind of a defeatist attitude. So I'm just take my risk. Okay. But then at some point in time, they said, oh, we got to do that. I'm going to spend all this money. And then usually this is when, you know, a big company would say, let's go get a second opinion because I'm the CEO or the board and I'm not comfortable spending this much money without a second opinion. I go take a look at the situation. My guidance to them and my guidance to the audience and basically any company is before you go spend a lot of money on some new stuff, I always promote a strategy I refer to as free first. Okay. How are we spending the current dollar? What technologies do we already have that could be employed in a better way to better secure the organization? And I've found that in most cases, most companies could probably improve security almost 100%, if not more, by just making, sometimes it's a policy decision, very simple things. When I was at General Motors, we made huge security advancements with electrical tape. Okay, I bought some colored electrical tape and we put it on certain cables. And I said, if this happens, pull this cable. Okay, pull the green cable. Okay, I can't tell you how significantly that improved our security, how many plants protected with electrical tape. Okay, and I just happened to buy different color electrical tape and asked everybody to buy the same 5 colors of electrical tape. So there are many, many things one can do to dramatically improve their security. And then when it comes to now, I only have so many dollars. I think was really important. And again, a failure I see in many companies is really identifying what is the crown jewels. Okay, again, I went to a very large operation, very large. The building itself I was looking at was under, I think, 8 acres of roof. Okay, but there were about 4 servers in there, 4 Windows machines that were the crown jewels. And I said, don't worry about the 8 acres. Protect these 4 boxes. Okay, and you'll go up 1,000%. And I said, here's 3, you know, upgrade the operating system, put a firewall around them, blah, 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 you know, maybe $25,000, okay, for something that was probably at least a couple $100 million a year operation. And I said, you know, how can you afford not to do this? Okay, right. But the problem was, they thought, well, we're so big, it's so expensive, it's so complex, we can't take it on. But finally with Ukraine, they said, we better at least go look. And there's some very low cost opportunities. So you may not get where NSA is or some of the other, you know, Intel operations, but you could probably still double or triple your security capability and reduce your risk such that when it happens, not only the problem you have when it happens is you're compromised, but then all too often it becomes public. And then you get crucified for not have taken prudent actions. And so prudent bar right now is not too high. And most companies can do it for low cost.
You know, it's funny, I asked the question and I didn't even think about the answer when I asked it. But, you know, the common advice that I give to financial services organizations or energy or DoD industrial base, you know, participants, go to the vendors who are matching your criteria. Meaning, if you're going to go to a managed service provider, make sure that they've built their MSP to align with what your needs are. There are a lot of MSPs, managed service providers, that have, $1 million in revenue and 25 different types of clients. I think that's a disaster waiting to happen. Instead, if you focus, and I'm going to use that $100 million credit union, if you focus on a firm like Ongoing Operations that only works with credit unions of that $100 to $1 billion size, then their best practices, their standard approach is going to have a lot more security built into it already, as opposed to organizations that are trying to build out bespoke deployments for every single client. The same goes with your managed security solutions providers. I think the same goes for every part of the cyber ecosystem. You want to have parties that really understand your problem. And if you're part of any of these 16 critical infrastructure sectors, you have a challenge, and there's not a lot of incumbent vendors. So what's one of the opportunities? The audience here, the cybersecurity marketplace, has the real opportunity to specialize, to dive deep, make that investment, and become a leader in creating and improving the solution. For me, the strategy that Cyber Capital Partners takes is the medium size of a critical infrastructure sector is your best starting point. And that's because they have budget to remediate, but they don't have budget to solve it on their own. And if you get 20, 30, 40 of the same type of organization to collaborate, then you can create a standardized solution that the small in the industry can adopt as well. And so I think the long-term solution goes from being, single deployments, multiple single deployments that look the same, to a standardized infrastructure, whether it's secure communications or it's software that was developed and security tools that were developed that can be integrated into the communications platform that all small businesses within that organization have access to as well. All right, so that was question one. There are a couple questions that are specific to Cyber Capital Partners, and I'll make those very quick answer. One is, when do we make our investments? We think there's a massive gap between proof of concept and Series A, Series B. And we think many of the flaws that the market perpetuates are because the cyber investors are looking for folks who know how to go sell a cyber capability, not folks who have solved a problem. And as we talked about before, there's that big gap between those who have a brilliant mind and create an awesome technology, and those who can really navigate the halls of a conference center, can make a compelling pitch. We think our team addresses that really well. The second question that goes hand in hand with that is to elaborate on the DoD Trusted Capital Marketplace. And that's an easy Google, but I'll add some more to this. One of our largest concerns is, how do you prevent foreign investments in U.S. cyber, U.S. military technologies? It's not enough to have a CFIUS board. You need to make sure that the folks who have their hands in the cookie jar have the U.S. national security motivation. So as a result, Katie Harrington created the U.S. Department of Defense Trusted Capital Marketplace, where emerging capabilities providers can apply to have their technologies listed, and U.S. investors that can evidence that their capital is coming from U.S. sources can apply. And it's not as rigorous as a TS/SCI full scope poly, but it's more than a TS. And so Cyber Capital Partners went through that process. And as a result, we get access to all of the emerging technologies there. And so I'll jump off of that topic quickly here. The next on here, So here's one I don't really fully know the answer myself. How is the use of fintech as a means of conducting offensive operations against adversarial nations and their key personnel being viewed in the national security community? And I don't have enough visibility specifically on the use of fintech. I do have a lot of use of AI, quantum, and blockchain NFT capabilities, and I can talk more about that. But specifically fintech, that's not one that I have a deep enough expertise. Do you, Cliff?
No.
Okay.
Probably the ones you named, I could talk more to as well.
Well, let's pivot to that, because I think that is an important part. And I think the quantum, the AI, and the blockchain represent ancillary and complementary technologies that need to be added, right? So, the United States, Russia, China, we're in this race for quantum computing dominance, and whoever wins that by 2030 supposedly is going to have global domination for the next 70 plus years. And so, in fact, I tend to think that the cyber war, or the Russian war with the Ukraine, is actually the effort of Russia to destabilize our lead in quantum and AI and other capabilities. The way that we deal with it is we participate with quantum researchers throughout the United States. Q Secure, American Binary are a couple that we work with that we like a whole lot. And any of our cyber research projects, we look to bring them into. And the reason for that is not only are we going to need to be ready for, the April 14th, 2030 date that, quantum is going to be ubiquitous and is going to be able to break standard encryption. But there's this whole entire transition from how do we build quantum adjacent technologies now that aren't going to require rip and replace within 7 years? How do we build those hybrid communication networks? How do we build those legacy IT, quantum computing IT networks to work together? So a very core part of what we do is anytime we like a technology from the national lab, we bring it to our quantum teams, we bring them to our AI teams, we bring them to the OEMs of each of the sectors, and we tend to work with the cloud service providers like Greg Pepis over at Amazon Web Services to really make sure we're understanding where that technology is going to be able to future-proof and be able to last more than 2-3 years, because the lifespan of a cyber technology can be awfully short. So we look to stretch that out as long as possible, and building it into next-gen capabilities is a key part of that. All right, I've rambled on a bit there. Cliff, you want to jump on that?
Yeah, I think the last point you made was, I think, the important one. I've been designing secure systems for a long time. I designed some in the late 80s. They're still operational and quite secure today. But how's that done? It's recognizing things that are likely to come, may or may not come. But you got to look, like you're talking about, at least 10 years in the future if you can, and say, how do I build a strategy today that would defeat that? Okay. Now, so for example, quantum, you talked about, look, everybody believes one of the big things quantum's going to do is going to disrupt encryption. Therefore, telecommunications is going to be untrusted. So how do I build a system in an untrusted network? Okay. And where you might as well be broadcasting in the clear. Okay,
right.
So what do I do? And this is where things like zero trust come to be, because that's basically the assumption of zero trust. So it becomes more about architecture now. How do I architect a solution that isn't reliant on things like encryption or telecom, and I don't have these assumed, trust relationships? And so this is, again, where we have probably the greatest shortfall in talent. And this is where I think we're going to see the innovation come from, is when that talent that does exist gets together and comes up with these patterns of technology and architecture that begins to prepare for the future. I don't think they're out there yet. I haven't seen them. I mean, like you said, I worked on the government stuff, decades ago and recently, but the stuff I worked on decades ago, some of that I still haven't seen out here. So the other thing I think it's exciting about Capital Partners and the kind of work you do is it generally the incubator is the government, and it may not come out for 10, 20 years. But I can tell you, for example, when I was in there, I was one of the early users of TCP/IP. When I got in the private sector, I'm one of the very first guys who rolled out TCP/IP in the commercial sector. And it allowed me to be highly successful and help those companies I work with to be highly successful. You'd recognize them all. But a lot of it was because the insight I had from my classified government work, and I think Capital Partners has the same thing. So they have probably greater insight of what is likely to be successful in the future.
So there's a question in here, where do data fabric platforms for data protection, where does that fit within the zero trust and the assumed trust breakdown?
It's really, I would really talk about it in the sense of masking. I'm sure you've probably heard of the term of masking. It's where you take data and you don't make it all visible. So in zero trust, you really want to restrict the access and functionality because you don't want to expose any more than you have to give. And so with that type of fabric encryption, you can very much guarantee and limit the access you grant is no more than is required. And right now what happens is this is an area where way too much data and information is exposed, where unintended consequences of information leakage and things happen. And so having the appropriate fabric, again, I just talked to a company and I said, if you're going to invest in encryption right now, the most important place for you to encrypt right now is your data fabric.
It's you hit on two things there. One is the encryption, and I think one of the things I'm most scared about long term is the amount of information that's being captured now that's encrypted, and it's going to be broken in 2030 or longer. It creates this much easier theft of US intellectual property, and I'd like to see us really get our encryption at that post-quantum level. But the second piece there that you hit on was the obfuscation, and I think that's one of the things we didn't have on the holistic solutions, and I didn't actually include it in our pipeline of deal flow. But one of the tools that we think is really awesome is called Hades out of Sandia National Laboratories, and we showcased it a couple of years ago here. And the idea is you want to build out environments that look real. And the more that you can build out those environments and have thousands of simultaneous dummy environments, the more it is hard to find the real. The idea, and I was just talking with a guy today, Emerson, who was talking about, secret sharing and taking data fields, breaking them apart, storing them on multiple clouds, storing them in multiple different encryptions, so that if you capture any piece of it, you're only seeing a small snippet, and it's almost IP frequency hopping, right? And so how do you obfuscate the data? I took a lesson from credit unions of the intelligence community who bring in non-intelligence community members to hide the fact that their rosters are filled with highly desired targets within three-letter agencies. So that whole idea of how do you hide in plain sight, how do you obfuscate the attack surface? That seems to be a huge part of the solution that I think we're going to see become the standard over the next several years here.
Yeah, I think what I like what you said. The only thing I would put in there, in addition to for sensitive information, you said partition it, compartmentalize it, spread it, but also put it on diverse architectures so that you make it as challenging as possible. You have to crack multiple locations, which you don't even know what they are. You have to crack multiple technologies, which you don't know what they are. And then you have the key that puts us together in multiple places, and you have multiple keys. So, and they're rotating. So the more, so to speak, secret sauce you can put in that's moving, the better. Or you absolutely have to have something like quantum computing to hack it. Plus, you have to compromise virtually all the accounts. And then the only way to hack it is quantum. But the more diversity you put into it, there are solutions that you should probably start thinking about. This is the way the world's going to be in 10 years. Start thinking about that now. Putting them all in one Oracle database and the associations in the Oracle database, you might as well just give it away.
Yeah, absolutely there. So we have another question that's come in. I'm not quite sure I fully understand it, so I'm going to work through it here. Is there development in process to train artificial intelligence systems to instrument varying depths of activities that veritably identify the elements of the fintech stack of individual or entity across an adversarial nation and its high value targets, where analytics would be able to determine the best strategies to locally crumble a fintech status with a precision hit or a solitary hit that would detonate or crash a standing or status akin to crumbling of the Jenga stack? I'm not quite sure what the question is asking there. Does that read to you, Cliff?
Yeah, I'm going to make my interpretation of what does it say.
Okay.
It says, can we crawl a nation state, a nation environment, and take a look at how the communications are, and based on pattern recognition, determine, the critical assets, and then understanding the behavior of that critical asset, potentially identify its vulnerability through potential, vulnerability scanning. So, almost with an AI system, just turn it loose, let it crawl, find the critical assets, find the weak links, and then report back.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's certainly, bots that are built to go find the vulnerabilities and the exploitabilities within organizations. And I don't know that I can add a whole lot more value to that, but there's a world of tradecraft where you take all of the defenses that we're talking about and all the technologies for defensive postures, and how do you apply them to the offensive. And I think what Cliff and I are really focused on in our own respective businesses is how do we best prepare the country for this cyber war? How do we respond quickly? It looks like it's an overwhelming problem, and to some extent it is, but I think more and more it tends to replicate what the health community is. And 100 years ago we weren't really solving health problems too particularly well, and we've created this national and international effort to conquer science. I don't think it's going to take us 100 years. I think there is this probably 5-step process that says, how do we take care of the biggest problems in the most standardized ways? How do we then automate them? How do we drive it into artificial intelligence? How do we then build it into quantum-based artificial intelligence? And then how do we build it into an infrastructure that all ecosystem participants can subscribe to? So
back to that earlier question about zero trust, one of the other characteristics of zero trust is independent verification. Watchdog systems. So, if you go into all the automation, it's kind of scary. We've seen all the scary stuff on that. But if you create a series or a pack of watchdogs that are watching over this to give you that earlier detection and vote basically the bad party off the island who's been compromised, and can do it at quantum speed, then you have a chance of survival. And again, these are the kind of thoughts we have to start generating today in preparation for what's coming.
So if anybody has any unanswered questions, feel free to put them into the chat here.
There is one in the chat, I believe. I don't know if you've answered that one. It says quantum computing.
Yeah.
Given the latest White House memo on this subject, your thoughts.
Well, my thoughts, and we hit on quantum a little bit. Greg Pepis, AWS, love the guy, and he's a strategic advisor to Cyber Capital Partners. So we do a lot of work together. He and I were down at South by Southwest, and AWS hosted a track at Capital Factory, which is another military technology accelerator. And he put together a quantum all-day session, and that was just absolutely fascinating. I will say my brain hurt really bad afterwards, right? So it's not for the faint of heart. There are multiple components of quantum, and so it's not a one size fits all. One is the concept of the supercomputer, and where are we going to get into the speed at which we can process. The second is secure communications and quantum communications, which seems to be a lot less theoretical and a lot more market ready in the next couple of years here. And then the third is quantum encryption and post quantum encryption. And I think all of those play a really important role in cybersecurity. Much the same way, and this is probably a weak analogy, but much the same way that we went from 8 tracks to tapes to CDs to digital, we're going to go from the historical ways of cybersecurity, the current means, which I think are fragmented and at best, weak. We're going to get to a spot where we're on this hybrid domain, and maybe by 2040, 2050, quantum computing becomes the standard. It's entirely possible that there is some other physics-based computing that becomes the standard by then as well. So as we go through this, I look at quantum, the various ranges or the various types of capabilities as a very important domain to build the technologies that we're building today, and keep in mind that we're going to build them onto the quantum world in the very near future here. And we have to be willing to do that continuous refresh and reevaluation of our cyber posture, because what is right today is going to very quickly be stale tomorrow. Cliff, did you? Yeah.
Yeah, I just think, look, there's some foundational concepts today that are in play, like frequency hopping, port hopping, a few things like that, we're going to see, and sometimes you have to make an assumption, but I think it's a safe assumption that with quantum computing, we're going to see the speed of frequency hopping and port hopping and maybe even container hopping and things like that going right along with the encryption. And so the more forms of hopping, and if you have a similar engine, maybe not the best engine, but the more engines you put on it, the more challenging it is for the one big bad boy to catch you. But if you haven't started thinking about those kind of architectures and variabilities in your system today, where you could apply additional speed, compute speed to it, then you're going to be where unfortunately, most of our government, at least the executive branch is, and basically have to consider redoing the entire portfolio of applications. And that is just one horrendous mountain to climb.
Yep. So, I look at where we're at. It first and foremost, it kind of surprised me that COVID hit so hard, right? Like when it happened, I thought to myself, oh, we're never going to see a global pandemic the way that the 1918 Spanish flu was. And we go, oh, well, I guess we are. And it's pretty easy for me now to go, oh, right, well, the concept of World War III probably isn't the same as the, logical transition from 1 to 2 was. I think CyberWar is here to stay for a long time. And, one, I think it's fascinating to see how quickly the whole entire trend of globalization got taken down. And then 2, I think it's vitally important that the United States does everything it can to bring its supply chain back to adjacent soil or U.S. soil, And in the same exact manner, whether we're talking about the software supply chain or we're talking about the national security supply chain, it's extremely vital that we figure out how to bring our suppliers closer to us, closer to the same standard of compliance, of security compliance. So altogether, we're here for a really big change. And I think that really big change is going to look a lot like, World War II with the war bonds and, everybody participating on a national level in the national defense. There are two questions that popped in here, both from Andrew. How about cloud RAID adoption by commercial sector at beyond the RAID 12-18 split locations count? And I think we're going back to that data fabric question. And this is certainly one that I raise my hand and go, I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully appreciate the question. It's my problem.
Andrew, if you want to raise your hand, Rich can let you in, and you can ask the question live if you'd like. Here's Andrew.
All right, go ahead.
Hello. I'm particularly intrigued about the discussion of spread spectrum, which is really a process kind of thing of hopping the frequency for radio, usually traditionally used in high security military communications. But there's a parallel in the space of data whereby data is split across multiple locations. Now, originally this has been used for resilience purposes with RAID drives locally.
Yep.
But the up and coming way to do this is to actually implement RAID across locations. It's very, very difficult to do. Government has done it for critical things, but traditionally it's been about 100 million of expense to manage the integration issues. It's coming to the commercial space. It first arrived in the media world, where you need it for loading CDNs for the next person looking at a new piece of content, but it's going to get applied in the space of commercial data protection very soon. The 100 million jump has been the huge problem, and in the commercial world, it's actually been even more expensive. The limit in the commercial world had been the RAID controller cost for high performance. Typically they had 4 interfaces, so that tended to limit the drive count locally to 12 to 18. In the commercial world, in the government world, they could jump over that by just spending the money. But now the thing that's critically changed is you can do network attached drives where you get rid of the operating system, you get rid of all the latency issues, and you can manage the latency across a wide area network. And it's that networking part that's so challenging to solve. But once you get through that with software defined stacks, you can actually implement high stripe count RAID on the wide area. And that seems to be the panacea for solving many of the challenges of zero trust, for doing like spread spectrum rather than by frequency hopping. You're actually hiding bits of your data in the RAID segments across locations. And this can be done at much higher than the 12 to 18 stripe count of the local limit for RAID. And this seems to be the way forward. I'm curious about both of your reactions to how far off this is in the commercial marketplace rather than the government market space, where the first events of these sorts of things were done actually in around about 1998. I worked with them in the early 2000 period.
Yeah,
Well,
I think you look at a company like Teradata,
Mm-hmm.
they're well equipped to take on this kind of challenge. Now, will they? I don't know, but the technology's kind of out there to go in pretty large scale. They just don't really do the distribution for security kind of purposes. They do it for performance. So I think as we move, we're going to see performance and security collide here, and it's going to be a positive thing. But I also think it's going to be a collection of these type approaches. So you talked about one, I think port hopping, processing hopping, container hopping, all these kind of things are going to take place. So the concept, the larger concept of obfuscation, of not even knowing where the target is and needing a supercomputer just to find the target, is where I think we're heading in Zero Trust.
So I'm going to say a statement here, Andrew, and that is, I don't have enough intimacy, with the raid. However, I welcome a conversation. Everything that we do is, scratch and sniff. And does this actually, make sense? And is there an opportunity there? And if there is, then we'll go facilitate a few other conversations and figure out if that does it still make sense. We're always looking for, what are the creative ways to solve major problems in cybersecurity, and if that does it, we have the communications experts who we can bring the conversation to. The other part of this is when you talk about something that's $100 million, well, that's far beyond the scope of what we would ever look to allocate capital to. And only because there's so much of the market that is around, the math says when you get to Series A, you're looking to raise 5 to 10 million. When you get to Series B or Series C, you're looking to get to that $50 million range. So you need to have a really, really strong depth in order to get the folks understanding why you need $100 million to go, deploy that solution. That said, I know fully, and I can get into a concern about monopolistic powers of our tech industry, but it is quite clear that the largest players are taking much, much larger risks on building out billion-dollar facilities or building out capabilities that require a massive lift, and there could be appetite for it. So, more than happy to set up a conversation with you, Andrew, and definitely appreciate the question.
Great. Most look forward to that. And thank you both for your spectacular presentation. Excellent summary of the current state of cyber warfare.
Well, definitely appreciated. All right, so we seem to be out of questions, and we also seem to be out of time. Cliff, is there anything?
We do have one more hand raised if you want to address it.
Okay,
This is Michael Stoltz.
Oh, bring Michael up. Michael, how are you? And you're on mute. There you go.
Still don't hear you, Michael.
Trying. He's got permission to talk.
You might have to take Andrew off of permission.
Take him off of permission.
Because it shows Andrew's hand is up and it's taking it off of Michael. There you go. Michael, how are you?
Hey, doing great. Thank you. I actually accidentally hit that button. Appreciate the presentation today. It was awesome. And I wanted to circle back with you and Cliff on a conversation and, pursue a strategic partnership going forward. And really appreciate it. It was really worthwhile. And I shared it with other folks and they're listening in as well. Thanks.
So for the audience, Michael Stoltz is out in Arizona, and he does some work with the local universities there, and also, like Cyber Capital Partners, takes technologies developed in the universities and in the national laboratories, develops CRADA agreements, and brings them into both the defense and the energy sector. And so it's always good to hear his voice. All right, so we're at time. Cliff, is there anything else you'd like to wrap up with?
No, I just thought it was a wonderful session. I think this is just going to continue to be more exciting as time goes on. I do believe Russia is also, we talked about the cyber range
Yep.
concept that Cyber Capital Partners represents. Unfortunately, today, I also believe Ukraine today is a cyber range
Yeah.
for many people to demonstrate their wares. So I'm sure there'll be cyber in the news on an ongoing basis, and look forward to another event as such. Thank you.
Well,